him a lot, 'cause we got him on the spot. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back.
Hello and welcome back to On the Spot. This is Paula Schaffner with episode 15 of Welcome Back, Kotter, The Sit-In. The IMDb summary is, instead of the planned food fight, Kotter convinces the Sweathogs to stage an all-night classroom sit-in to protest the school's serving of liver for lunch. This episode first aired on January 13th, 1976. As usual, Bob Lahendro directed, but it was the only Welcome Back, Kotter episode written by the team of William Bickley and Michael Warren. Bickley was born in 1947 and as of this recording is still alive. His TV writing career started with Love American Style in 1970. He also did All in the Family, Room 222, Me and the Chimp, 11 episodes of The Partridge Family, 17 for Happy Days, 3 for Laverne and Shirley, and I've always suspected that the character of Mr. Bickley on Mork and Mindy was named after him. He also did What's Happening, 5 Love Boat episodes, 10 episodes of Perfect Strangers, and he went on to create Step by Step and Family Matters. His last credit at this time is one episode of Viral Vignettes from 2021. I wasn't able to find a bio for Michael Warren. I'm guessing he might have been a little bit younger because his first writing credit was for Happy Days in 1975, but his last credit is as the creator of Two of a Kind 1998 to 99 with Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen. In the cold opening, the Kotters are at the front door and he's dressed for work and carrying a suitcase while she's still in pajamas. It looks like the same outfit he'll wear throughout the episode, so it's not one of those standalone jokes that could have been filmed at any time. He exclaims that he's got to go. He's late. She kisses him goodbye and says she'll see him later. He waves goodbye and she closes the door after him. She goes back to bed and climbs in. I'm guessing that they both overslept or perhaps they made love that morning, but in case she's still tired. But he returns to ask her if he told her about his Uncle Bernie. She's surprised since she thought he was late. Gabe explains that his Uncle Bernie was always late because Aunt Helene would drive him crazy. She threatened to dance on his grave, but he said he'd be buried at sea, so let her dance. And there's no explanation of how this relates to being late, other than I guess late in the sense of deceased. I assume this is not the same Uncle Bernie from episode 8 who smelled so bad that farm animals wouldn't sleep with him. The first classroom scene, all I can tell you is it's not set on a Friday because it will continue over into the next day. But this is another episode with a very short time frame taking place less than 24 hours. We begin with a freeze frame of Kotter erasing the blackboard, and I wasn't able to read the words this time. There's a snippet of the theme and then applause as the image unfreezes, and the applause is pretty lengthy. It includes whistles, and it lasts into Mr. Woodman's entrance in a yellow raincoat and hat with a hooked black umbrella over his arm. Woodman starts to talk about his informants, suggesting that there is spying going on in the high school, but Gabe interrupts him to call him Captain Ahab, who's looking for Moby Dick. And the previous Moby Dick reference on the series was on the episode Barbarino's Girl, where unfortunately Judy was compared to the whale. When Woodman tries again, Kotter borrows his cap and starts singing in the Rain. So another example of how Gabe likes old movies. He takes the umbrella and incorporates it into his dance. Woodman grabs the umbrella, but Kotter keeps going. Woodman gets his hat back and says, "That's not entertainment, Kotter," which made me laugh out loud. The movie came out in 1974 and it was a compilation of classic movie moments. Woodman puts his hat back on. He tries again and says that he's dressed like this because his informants have told him that the Sweathogs are planning a food fight in the cafeteria. And he says that Kotter remembers the last cafeteria riot. I don't know if this was the one that Gabe was in high school. Probably not, because it seems like a long time for them to go without a cafeteria riot. Also, it's notable that they are talking about food fights when the movie Animal House, which came out a few years later, was associated with popularizing food fights, at least in media. Here we have a potential one. Woodman says that after that riot, it took him weeks to get the goulash out of his socks. Hard to imagine them serving goulash at a school cafeteria, but maybe in Brooklyn in the 70s. The bell rings. Kotter tells Woodman that his, meaning Kotter's, kids would not plan a food fight without telling him first. So by this point, he feels like the Sweathogs would confide in him and consider him to be an ally. The Sweathogs file in this order. One in a fireman outfit, including helmet, with his arm around one of the brunette white girls who's dressed as maybe a house painter. She's got white overalls, but a gold helmet. net. The only other thing I could think of was maybe beekeeping, but she doesn't have the net. Freddie has a swim cap, sunglasses, and blue overalls. Cap Boy comes in a yellow and black striped one-piece outfit, making him look like a bee. True to character, he's wearing an aviator's cap. Verna Jean is in a space or diving helmet, but otherwise normal clothes. The fluffy-haired boy is in blue and white stripes. There's another brunette girl, kind of small, and she's in a chef's hat and apron over her regular clothes, and she's wearing glasses. I think she's new, or at least she wasn't wearing glasses before. I don't know if this is a commentary on the cafeteria food, or she just felt like this was the best costume she had. There's another small brunette white girl in a football helmet and blue sort of outfit, looks like maybe pajamas. The not Gutenberg guy is dressed as a doctor who's in surgery, including a mask. Vinny is dressed as a scuba diver, and the red-haired boy is in a black cape like Dracula. In season 1, we see them wearing plausible costumes, things that they could have borrowed from adults that they know, or perhaps found in a thrift store. Juan says, "Hey, shalom, amigo," because he's a Puerto Rican Jew. And then Freddie says, "Hey, what's happening?" The cheers include whistles. So I think it's both that the audience likes seeing everybody and they like seeing everybody in costumes. Woodman insists that Sweathogs are not people, which he has said before. Kotter wants to handle it. Woodman says he'd better, or Woodman won't let him collect unemployment. He'll tell them that Kotter never worked here. He laughs meanly and then laughs again before he exits. Kotter imitates Woodman's laugh more quietly. Arnold enters wrapped in a green garbage bag with a green cap on top. Joyce, the usual black female extra, follows in a blue painter's smock and closes the door behind her. And I think the reason why she's coming in late is specifically so that she can close the door because Arnold can't move his arms. There's laughter and applause. Kotter puts his hand on Arnold's shoulder and asks if he's noticed that he's wearing a green plastic bag. Arnold says he's disguised as a green bean, and he does his laugh. Arnold sits next to Juan. Kotter puts his hands on his hips and laughs deeply. Arnold slides down in his seat. In a deep voice, Kotter asks Little Sprout how things are in the valley. In a high-pitched voice, Arnold answers, "Fine and dandy, jolly green giant. How's your niblets?" And he does a high-pitched laugh. Kind of suggestive, niblets. Juan and the studio audience are amused. And of course, this is a reference to Jolly Green Giant vegetable commercials. And according to Wikipedia, since 1972, the giant has had a young apprentice, the little green sprout, who represents the consumer. I remember the commercials vaguely from the time, but I didn't remember that aspect. Turning back into himself, Kotter says, "Ho, ho, ho! The green giant thinks little sprout has been dipping into the sauce." And that was the thing that the Jolly Green Giant would say, "Ho, ho, ho," and have that deep voice. And of course, he's implying that Arnold has been drinking. Kotter asks the class why they didn't tell him today was going to be dress-up day. He could have painted graffiti on himself and come as a subway train, which is at least the second or third reference to subways. Arnold seriously says, "You joke, Mr. Kotter. We are fighting against something that truly grievously disturbs us." That's always how he pronounces grievous, adding an E sound in the middle. Juan and Joyce nod. Freddie says, "Yeah, they're protesting liver." Kotter asks, "Anybody's liver in particular?" Verna Jean close-up says, "Yeah, the liver they make them eat in the cafeteria every Wednesday." Again, I never ate goulash or liver in my Southern California cafeteria, but who knows. And that was a thing a lot in 70s sitcoms, how awful liver tastes. This became a thing on Happy Days, if I remember correctly. Comes up in 2 or 3 episodes. Everyone says yeah, and then one says they're going to throw, which is how he pronounces throw, food around the cafeteria until they, meaning the cafeteria workers or the school administration, treat their, meaning the Sweathogs, wishes with a little respect. The others agree. Vinny, who's unzipped his scuba suit to reveal a dark blue t-shirt, says they've got a dynamite plan. Then John Travolta has to pause for squeals from the audience. So again, we can see the building of the fandom for Barbarino and Travolta. Vinny says first Epstein is going to throw the first handful of weenies and beans. We might have eaten weenies and beans, but it was in grade school. It was very simple stuff, like that square pizza. Vinny says Washington is then going to dump his cottage cheese in the cash register again. We might have had cottage cheese. Well, Horshack starts flicking chicken, and Catboy looks incredibly enthusiastic about the plan. Horshack says they'll punch him in the pot roast. He stands and says they'll kick him in the corned beef. They'll mash him in the meatballs. Sort of like a cheer. Somewhat suggestive to mash them in the meatballs. The class classmates urge him on. Kotter has little Sprout sit again and says before they ruin their clothes, or whoever's clothes they happen to be wearing, so implying that they borrowed these, have they ever thought about making their feelings known in a civilized manner? For instance, writing a petition. Freddie laughs dismissively and says petitions don't do no good. Kotter says sure they do. As an example, he writes no liver on the board. He says they can all sign it. And of course, if it's on the board, Woodman or whoever's going to have to come in and see it, it's not something they can hand in, and as we'll see, it's very easily destroyed. Freddie says they can send it to Santa Claus and carry the North Pole, and this is the second episode where he refers to Santa, and this is another example of Freddie being possibly the most cynical Sweathog. The redhead is especially amused by this. Kotter says all throughout history, people have peacefully demonstrated for what they believed in. They all have a chance to be part of a great moment in history. He doesn't really give specific names, but this is an example of how he is taking something that's going on in their lives and applying social studies to it. Starting with Juan and Arnold, the class makes patriotic music as Kotter talks about how, just as their forefathers had taxation without representation, we Sweathogs have liver on Wednesday. We are the people. We are committed. We shall be heard, and we shall not perish from the earth, and we shall not eat liver on Wednesdays. Vinny claps his swin fans like cymbals at the end of the tune. Arnold asks where he signs, and he rips off his bag. Kotter tells him to put his John Hancock up on the board, so that's what Arnold literally signs, John Hancock. Kotter wants more people to sign, but Woodman lets himself in and says it really would be funny if he told the unemployment office that Kotter never worked here, so he's still thinking about that. Kotter says that would be funny, but not as funny as this, and he makes one of his goofy faces. Woodman says that's not funny, haha, that's funny strange. He asks what's happening with the food fight, because when he left a few minutes ago, Kotter said he was going to handle it. Kotter smiles and says Woodman will be happy to know that they've decided against the food fight. We Sweathogs, and again he's counting himself as part of the group, are going to work through the system. Woodman says there's only one system here. You're free to do as you're told. So he's the ultimate figure of authority, even though he's vice principal and we don't hear as much about the principal. Kotter tells him to cast his eyes on the petition. Soon every Sweathog's name will be up on that board. Woodman asks, who's this Hancock kid? And erases the petition. Of course, he himself was a history teacher, but maybe it doesn't immediately occur to him that it was the John Hancock. And of course, I don't know if they say that as much, but like as a signature, put your John Hancock right here, famous signature in history. Woodman says they all have to eat this swill, meaning liver and the other food, including him. If he dies, he's taking every one of them with him. He laughs evilly. And then right before he exits, he says he's becoming a funny guy. And I talked about this on the episode where Woodman said he had no sense of humor, and that was the one where he went over to the Kotter's house for dinner. He started to learn how to tell jokes, and so heading more towards a Woodman that is often serious, but then he'll still do kind of cruel jokes. We're seeing that evolution happening here. Kotter admits that the petition failed, but will they let that stop them? They all say yes. He says it didn't stop Bonzo Moretti. Now this is the same name as Vinny's friend in Arrivederci, Arnold. When Kotter says, who you ask is Bonzo Moretti? Arnold says he doesn't ask that and asks Juan if he asks that. Juan shakes his head. Even though no one cares, Kotter tells them that Bonzo Moretti was a kid he went to school with. When Bonzo had emotions, feelings, he let them be known. He thought there should be a stoplight on the street where they played stickball, just to let the city know he meant business. Bonzo sat right down in the middle of the street, so Gabe kneels. Freddie asks if there's a stoplight there now. Kotter says no stoplight, but there's a plaque right on the spot where the truck ran over Bonzo. I assume that Vinny's friend that he refers to is not Bonzo Jr., because the ages wouldn't line up, and this Bonzo probably died before he had kids. I think it's just they liked the name Bonzo Moretti. At that time, Bonzo was sort of associated with the Ronald Reagan movie Bedtime for Bonzo, where Bonzo is a chimp. It also kind of sounds like Bozo the Clown, and then combined with the Italian-sounding name Moretti. And my guess is that it was probably a name that Kaplan had in his stand-up. For all I know, there was a real Bonzo Moretti back in the 60s. Vinny asks if Kotter wants them to sit there and wait until a truck runs over them. Catboy looks like he thinks Kotter is crazy. Kotter changes to sitting cross-legged and says if they do a sit-in here, Woodman will see that they're committed, that they mean business, that they're willing to stand up for what they believe in, and nobody makes the joke that how can we stand up if we're sitting? Kotter realizes that he sat in someone's gum. The class joins him, Arnold saying he's with Mr. Kotter all the way, and Juan saying he's committed. There's a fade to an analog clock, and it's now 4:28. Everyone is on the floor looking bored. Catboy has decided to lounge. He's not just going to sit. They're all in whatever regular clothes they had on under their protective costumes. Arnold looks like he's holding one's hand, but I think he's checking one's watch. One says it's been about an hour and a half since school got out, which confirms my theory that school is dismissed at 3 o'clock. One wonders if they, meaning Woodman and the authorities, know that the Sweathogs mean business yet. Freddie in close-up says nobody even knows they're in there. They're the only people who know they're having, and he says in sort of an affected kind of way, a sit-in. Like he doesn't take sit-ins seriously. There may be a generational thing going on here, I'm not sure, because sit-ins were associated with the 60s and that particular kind of peaceful protest, and maybe because Freddie is of a later generation and somewhat cynical, he doesn't really take this seriously. Although sit-ins, of course, were a big part of the civil rights movement. Woodman lets himself into the classroom. Kotter gets up without difficulty. I thought that was interesting because in the episode, I think it was Mr. Kotter Teacher, where they were all sitting around and rapping, which is also very 60s. Kotter had trouble getting up and down from the floor and made what I call his father's noises, which came up way back on the basket case episode. But here, maybe he's getting more used to sitting on the floor. And the others all stand. Verna Jean says that Woodman has come to cancel the liver. I just want to note this is the 8th Verna Jean episode. She has more to do here than she did in the previous episode. It's not a big episode for her, but she gets some nice little moments. Arnold says the thrill of victory, but Woodman says they didn't win anything, so Arnold says the agony of defeat. I think that was used on the Wide World of Sports program in the 70s. Kotter tells Woodman about the sit-in and says they'll be there all night if necessary, but the gang, as he refers to them, is not willing. Verna Jean asks Kotter if he's lost his marbles. Freddie says he distinctly heard the sound of marbles dropping. Woodman says as far as he's concerned, they can stay here as long as they want. It'll be one night the city can rest easy. Going back to the earliest image of the Sweathogs as menacing thugs, and of course to Woodman they still sort of are. If they weren't here in the classroom, they'd be out committing crimes. Kotter warns Woodman that they're committed. Woodman says if they're not committed, they ought to be, and committed to an insane asylum, as it might have been called then. Woodman again laughs and says the becoming a funny guy exit line. Not yet a catchphrase, but you can kind of see them workshopping that. Kotter shuts the door and thinks someone has been spiking Woodman's prune juice, and that was a common joke about somebody who was elderly or at least older. And the second time he's implied that somebody has been drinking in this episode. Kotter stops the class from exiting. Vinny says it's 4:30, school's over, they've got to go. Kotter opens the door and says if they want to leave, leave. But he asks what if the Founding Fathers felt the way they feel? The Founding Fathers believed in something and stood up for it. He sits down and says they used to gather every night in the Valley Forge Ramada Inn. Of course, a joke about a hotel that wouldn't have existed in the 1700s. They'd sing songs that made this country great. But instead of it being Yankee Doodle or something like that, he enthusiastically sings 99 bottles of beer. Arnold is, of course, the first to join in. The others reluctantly give in. As the class sings, Kotter says, that's the way it was 200 years ago today, the Valley Forge Ramada Inn. This Bicentennial Minute has been brought to you by SHEL, Students Happy to End Liver. And so that's the second reference in the series to Bicentennial Minutes, which was a common feature through 75 to 77, but of course the Bicentennial was 1976. Kotter joins the song again. The applause includes whistles as we go to commercial. When we return, Catboy is now lounging across two desks. The Not Gutenberg boy looks like he's trying to sleep, and Joyce has her legs straight out in front of her, revealing these wonderful green Argyle socks. One is pacing and marking off his paces on the blackboard. Arnold has just gotten to one bottle of beer in the song, so of course he pursued it to the end, long after everyone else got bored. Kotter returns in the same outfit from before, minus the jacket. In an amused tone, he says he finally got a hold of everybody's parents, and for some strange reason, they're not upset that the kids won't be home tonight. So he had to call, I assume, a dozen sets of parents, because I don't think there's any siblings in the class. We already know that Juan's parents don't really care if he doesn't come home, and they'll give away his food and his bed if he doesn't, and apparently the other parents don't care either. Juan crosses off his 30th pace, and then as Chico marks, he greets Kotter with, "How you doing, boss?" And he points at the hash marks and says, "That's pretty good, huh, boss?" Kotter, of course, goes into the Groucho crouch and pretends to hold a cigar. He follows Juan and calls him Mr. Ravelli. They fall into a routine about China, Cleveland, and hydro agoraphobia. As a Mr. Kotter teacher, they're in the Groucho and Chico relationship from Duck Soup. This feels very natural to them as characters, and I think to Kaplan and Hedges that they just immediately click into this. As if in a trance, Arnold says, "Reasoner." Still as Groucho, Kotter puns on this, and still as Chico, Epstein says, "Hey boss, I think he's delirious." But Arnold says he always has supper with Harry Reasoner, and that was the TV newsman who then hosted the ABC Evening News, so of course another plug for ABC. Arnold wants to get a cheeseburger, and the others want to go too, but Kotter stops them. He reminds them that they're on a sit-in. Then he says they'll go out for a couple minutes, grab some burgers, and sit right back in. And watching this, I thought, as long as Kotter was using the phone, I presume that he was calling from the office, why didn't he call and have pizza delivery or Chinese food or something? Because he doesn't know how long this is going to go on. Kotter pushes the class back in and says it's very important that they stay there. It's not that hard. People have gone without food for days. Then he says, and they died right after. This isn't a starvation protest. There's no reason why they can't eat. So again, I feel like he should have fed them. I mean, yes, there's a lot of kids, but it just would have motivated them to stay more. And then Julie, who's wearing her glasses, makes her first appearance in the classroom, so that's notable. And she's carrying a stack of blankets and a picnic basket. Gabe asks what she's doing here. Arnold realizes that the picnic basket means food. Everyone advances on her. She says there's plenty here for everybody. She's brought her famous tuna casserole. Everyone, including the extras, turns away and sits on the floor. And so this is another running joke that her tuna casserole is so awful. And I don't know if the non-speaking students ever came over to the apartment or if they just heard about it from the main floor, how bad this is. Presumably she made enough for about 15 people. But it didn't occur to her to bring anything for breakfast. I know it's not the Kotter's responsibility to feed these kids, but again, it would have been nice. Julie says they'll appreciate it when they're a little bit hungrier. Gabe says about 1,000 years ago, there was a great famine in Europe. I don't think there was. At least I never heard of it. I was trying to think like, well, there was a plague maybe 600 or 700 years before this, but okay, we'll go with it. He's a history teacher. He says, if you ask those people at that time when they were starving to choose between death and her tuna casserole, 98% would have chosen death. She says she's also brought blankets to keep them warm and toasty tonight. He tells her this is not a love-in, it's a sit-in, and a love-in was also a very 60s thing. Not necessarily sex, but definitely a group gathering where people could be physical together. She's wearing a floral jacket. I don't know if that was symbolic, her being an ex-flower child, but she unbuttons it and says she knows the difference. In case he's forgotten, she used to organize sit-ins. So a little insight into Julie, presumably during her college days. She sits and tries to get the group to sing 99 bottles of beer because she doesn't know that Gabe had them doing that earlier. Arnold says he loves this song, but no one else is having anything to do with this. One even puts his hand over Arnold's mouth. Gabe says it's time to go sleep. Betty bye time. I don't know what time it is. It would have been nice if we'd had more shots of the classroom clock. And I guess when Gabe was calling all the students' parents, he must have called Julie and told her he would be home late, and then she had enough time to make enough tuna casserole and gather the blankets. I'm surprised they own 15 blankets, but maybe she borrowed from Candy Lieberman and other neighbors. The students object to going to sleep, but he has the Goyles, as he pronounces girls, go on the far side of the room, and the boys will be on the near side. He also has them each take a blanket. Except Vinny says they've got a little problem here. He sleeps in the nude. We also know he sleeps with his brother. Kotter calls his bluff. Vinny says he's darn lucky it's so cold in here tonight. So we don't know if Vinny actually sleeps in the nude, if this was thrown in to titillate the fangirls in the studio audience, or if this was Vinny's way of being sent home so he doesn't have to stay overnight. Vinny goes over to the 5 girls, but Kotter objects. Vinny insists that he's Vinny Barbarino because he's always got to do his full name when he can. Hey, I'm Vinny Barbarino. But Kotter tells him to Vinny his Barbarino on this side of the room. Vinny gets a blanket and Kotter turns out the light. He offers to leave the hall light on. So I guess there's a switch right outside this classroom that controls the hall light. Arnold says they're not babies. But of course he's the one who whimpers and then sucks his thumb before turning on both lights. Arnold says he would have been okay if he had his teddy. Sitcom characters that have teddy bears range from Mr. Howell to Radar on MASH, and it's sort of this symbol of innocence sense. But when Kotter says Arnold can't have his teddy, Arnold says, how about Mrs. Kotter? And he grins and raises and lowers his eyebrows very quickly. So I'd said recently that I thought Arnold was the least likely to come on to Mrs. Kotter, but he does here in a joking way. Julie laughs, so she's not offended. Kotter, who's going to sleep next to Julie, says Arnold can't have his teddy either, referring to his wife as his teddy bear. Kotter has Arnold leave the hall light on. Vinny starts praying to Dear Lord, as he calls him, and he says that they're really close. Juan asks about it and says it's cool. He tells him to send his regards. Vinny prays, now I lay me down to sleep. Arnold Horshack at my feet. So Arnold does his laugh. Vinny asks Dear Lord to bless Vinny's mom and all the girls out there he ain't met yet. And the studio audience, of course, squeals. It is interesting, he doesn't mention his father or his siblings, but Vinny's mother is very important to him. And again, we're reminded that Vinny is a ladies' man. Juan asks Horshack if he ever thinks about what God is like. Arnold thinks God is short, with a marvelous sense of humor and a great laugh. Verna Jean says God can do anything. Freddie says he can, and she says she can. The audience applauds and cheers. Verna Jean adds that God sings just like Aretha Franklin. And Joyce, who's of course another young black woman, looks like she's thinking about that. One thinks God is tough but fair, like John Wayne in a white beard. So of course he does a John Wayne impression. He slaps hands with Arnold, but it looks like he hurts Arnold's hand. Usually when they slap hands, Arnold misses because of his timing and lack of cool. Vinny thinks God is a sharp dresser, good looking, and of course Italian. Freddie thinks all that stuff about harps is a lot of jive. God is backed up by a jazz rhythm section, piano, bass guitar, and a drummer with a good right foot. Julie thinks God is love, and if God were here, he'd love Julie's tuna casserole. It's a very hippie view of love, but tying it back to her main specialty. One asks Mr. Kotter his feelings on this subject. Kotter thinks God is everywhere. Arnold asks, even in liver? Kotter says God is in Times Square. He used to be in Ebbets Field. That field faded away after the Brooklyn Dodgers moved to LA in 57, and so if Kotter was born in 47, he would have been about 10 at the time. God is Moonlight in Vermont, which is the second reference in a row to this song from 1944. Autumn in New York, a song from 1949. All the standards. So songs that were slightly before his time or his parents' generation. Kotter thinks God is everywhere, with the possible exception of Epstein's gym locker. So yeah, take a drink, another reference to Epstein's gym locker. Gabe says to go to sleep. So this is another of these moments where they get kind of philosophical, but in a funny way. It's interesting that everybody's view of God is kind of like what they want to grow up to be. Arnold thinks God is short and has a marvelous sense of humor and a great laugh because Arnold is short and he has a marvelous sense of humor and a unique laugh. Verna Jean probably wants to be powerful and sing like Aretha Franklin, and Juan, who's tough but fair, identifies with that version of God. And Vinny thinks of himself as a sharp dresser, good looking, and of course Italian. And then Freddie, whose nickname is Boom Boom, of course thinks in terms of music. And then, like I said, Julie's answer is kind of hippie. Kotter's view of God is that God is everywhere and everything, even beyond what he wants to grow up to be. But I think also Kotter does sort of want to be that all-encompassing and that open, I guess. Then we fade to a pan from the girls' side of the room all the way to the door, which Woodman is opening. He says, look at them. When they're all asleep like that, they still look like Sweathogs. So instead of saying they look cute or harmless, they're still Sweathogs. He goes over and shakes Kotter's shoulder and says Kotter's name a couple times. Gabe sleepily gets up and says they've been here all night. And I don't know what time in the morning this is. Again, it would have been nice to get a view of the clock, but I assume it's before school actually opens. Arnold says they're going to stay here forever or until Vinny wakes up, whichever comes first. So we learn here that Vinny is probably the heaviest sleeper in the class. One stands and asks what Woodman is going to do about the liver now. Woodman says he can't do anything because Buchanan's liver contract still has 3 years to run. So they have made a deal with a meat supplier for the cafeteria. He says, besides, who cares if a bunch of Sweathogs spend the night in a classroom? By now, everyone but Vinny is awake. Some of them have got to their feet. Then Todd, Judy, and their black classmate enter with sleeping beanbags. And the black student, again, has no name, no lines, but it's Eric Suter, who was on the Great Debate episode, and IMDb credits him as an honor student. This is the third episode with Todd, so he was in the Great Debate. We last saw him fighting Epstein, so didn't exactly leave on great terms with the Sweathogs. And it's the fifth episode with Judy, and we last saw her in the Barbarino's Girl episode where she seemed to have made peace with the Sweathogs, particularly Vinny. Todd enthusiastically shakes Woodman's hand and says he certainly looks robust today. Woodman tells Ludlow he's already class president. Stop pushing for Woodman's job. And he yanks his hand away. And I wonder what happened to Scott Phillips. This kind of confirms my theory that when they did the class president episode, they had not yet settled on the Todd Ludlow character. They have kind of retconned it so that Vinny was running against Todd rather than Scott. Judy tells Mr. Kotter that they are the first wave of the students who have decided to join his cause. More are coming. This is a liver rebellion. And she leads a down with liver chant. So we don't get a lot of Judy in this episode, obviously, but she is less pissy, I guess is the only thing I can think to say. She is more positive, maybe because she is feeling more positively towards the Sweathogs, and this is a common cause. Apparently, they heard about this, and the news was spread overnight. They have decided that they will come the next morning and join this sit-in Mr. Kotter's class. And of course, we don't have to have more extras cast, just implied that there will be more students coming. But of course, these honor students are there bright and early. Woodman yells for silence and then says that since the real students seem to dislike liver too, so again, this thing of the Sweathogs are not real people, even in their own eyes, but the honor students are. Since they seem to dislike liver too, he'll see if he can work out a trade with the principal at New Utrecht, which is another part of Brooklyn. That principal's students are protesting chip beef. Wait till you taste the chip beef, he says. And chip beef is associated with the army, where it was S-word on a shingle, SOS. He laughs evilly, and then he exits. Bernadine says they still won, and everyone cheers. And she's really invested in this, I think more than some of them. She believed in the sit-in, even though Freddie didn't. Arnold oohs, but Kotter tells him it's much too early in the morning to ooh-ooh. Gabe rests his head on Julie's shoulder and looks like he's going to fall asleep. Arnold thinks they should wake up Vinny before they celebrate, as he pronounces it. Kotter kneels and pretends to be Vinny's mother, so Vinny responds accordingly. Then when Gabe stands up again, he and Julie hug, and she congratulates him. Nearby, Freddie and the not Gutenberg boy rest on each other, which is kind of cute. Gabe says, today Woodman's liver, tomorrow my wife's tuna casserole. She playfully punches him, and then they hug again. There's applause and a snippet at the theme. The students are all lying down again, as if they're going back to sleep. Hypothetically, we could have started on a Friday going into Saturday morning, but it seemed more likely that this was another weekday morning. I did to add, I obviously wasn't paying attention, that it's Wednesday when they serve liver. In the tag, Julie is folding laundry on the couch. She takes it to Gabe, who's in the bathroom with the door open, and she wants him to help. He calls her baby, but he just pauses in his shaving to tell her about his Uncle Jack, who was afraid to fly. Aunt Rose took him up in an open pre-World War II plane. Uncle Jack was worried they'd crash and there'd be an expensive funeral. He's cheap. So the pilot said if Jack was quiet, he wouldn't charge Jack for the flight, so the pilot figured he'd get to him through his cheapness. Jack shut up, even when Rose fell out of the plane. Gabe laughs, and Julie hands him the laundry basket. She playfully puts some shaving cream on his nose with the tip of her finger, and he air kisses her. So again, this thing of he talks about unhappily married couples, but she doesn't hold it against him, and it's just a part of their own relationship. I'd said on the previous pod that I like this episode better than episode 14. There's actually not a lot more to it, but just felt nice and solid and amiable. We've got the catchphrases and the characterization is established enough, but it's not stale. Woodman is the villain, but even he is trapped in the red tape and bureaucracy. And we have the half-generation gap between the Kotters and the Sweathogs. I give each of these episodes a letter grade, like in a classroom, so F- to A+, and this one is a B. It's not one of the best episodes of the season. It's just a nice time. Good ensemble work and some individual moments. Overall, just satisfying. As far as the thing about the cafeteria goes, the details have kind of faded for me, but I believe that there is a later episode, season 2 or 3, where Freddie and Juan are on the school paper and they are investigating something about the cafeteria. I don't remember if it's liver, but obviously we will hear about the cafeteria again, and so we'll see if this has any further relation to that, if there's any kind of continuity. You could definitely see that this is written by a team with sitcom chops. A very sitcom-y episode, more so than some of the others, but as I said, it's just nice and satisfying in that way. And I, of course, enjoy having Julie come to the school because we've started to see that barrier between home and work break down in the past where the Sweathogs come to the apartment. And so now we're getting a little bit of that. And obviously, Julie will become much more involved in this school in season 4. And just the dynamic. This is an episode where the Sweathogs are all united in a common cause, and both Kotters are on their side. So that was nice to see that teamwork. Although, of course, Gabe is the one who is more enthusiastic about the sit-in, but he does have allies like Arnold and Bernadine. Also, for each of these episodes, I pick a head of the class, not necessarily a student, and that is the character who I most enjoyed watching. It is a very strong Gabe episode, and I liked him in this, but I'm going to have to give it to Juan because I liked that he was the one that led the philosophical, theological discussion about God. I don't really care about John Wayne, but as I said, I really enjoy him playing Chico to Gabe playing Groucho. I don't know if there's any significance to the fact that the Marx Brothers were Jewish, and of course these are the two Jewish characters. Obviously they are both classic film fans, as we see elsewhere in the episode, and so they connect on that level. And it was nice to get a glimpse of the real students in that bit, that they end up being part of the solution to this. Not that the Sweathogs sit-in was meaningless, they did serve as an inspiration, but it was Todd, Judy, and their friend coming in who finally convinced Woodman. And so I like that they are not antagonists here as they were in the Great Debate episode. So that is an example of how things are changing during season 1, which is not to say that they will always be on as good terms. Next time I'll be looking at the first of what will turn out to be several multi-part episodes, and this one is called Follow the Leader. It might be what I was remembering as Freddie becomes the leader of the Sweathogs instead of Vinny. We'll find out if that is what that is, and I'll talk about a little bit the 75 to 76 TV schedule. In the meantime, sit down and stand up for your rights.
Tease him a lot, 'cause we got him on the spot. Welcome back.